Hello everyone, I'm Jacob Kaufman, I'm the nerd on the street, and this is part 2 of my big Frugal NAS build. Alright everyone, it has been over 2 months since I published the first part of this series. That first part has gotten a lot more attention than I was expecting. It's gotten 1.8 thousand views, which is a lot for a build video on this channel. So I'm glad a lot of you guys are interested in this project. I'm sorry about the delay. I've been very busy with school plus my day job. But this weekend I finally had some time to sit down and sort through more of this footage. Now, part 2 of this video is going to be a sort of in-between part. In part 1, I started unboxing all of the parts, I started putting some of it together. Here in part 2, we're going to unbox and install the remaining parts, and we're going to finish up with the hardware, and we're going to start working with the software. I'm going to install the operating system later, but we're not actually going to get all the way done with the software portion. There is going to be a third part to this series as well that's going to take a look at just the software and how I have things configured on this NAS. So personally, this second part, it feels kind of dry to me, but I hope that some of you enjoy it. Like I said, we'll start off with finishing up the hardware, so this first clip is going to be unboxing the hard drives that I'm going to use in this system, and we'll go ahead and show that now. Alright guys, and it is September 30th now. I'm here tonight with a quick clip. I need to unbox 3 things, and then I'm not going to be able to actually use these 3 things for another week or 2. But I ordered these all from Newegg, and I actually ordered them to another address. I'm currently living in Colorado, but I ordered these to an address in Missouri because Newegg doesn't charge sales tax when you're shipping to Missouri. But that does mean that I ordered these a couple weeks ago before they made their way to me. Somebody was visiting anyway, and so I had them bring it to me. Now, 2 of these are hard drive boxes, and one of them is RAM. Now, the hard drive boxes, one of them looks a lot more beat up than the other one. They both look a little bit beat up now that I look a little closer. I actually ordered them separately on separate Newegg accounts. One of them came from Newegg Business, and the other one came from Newegg Consumer. And I did that so that they would hopefully ship separately, but they ended up on the same UPS truck. They had separate tracking numbers, but I could tell they were on the same truck because all of the tracking updates were exactly the same. But one of these is an 18 terabyte Seagate hard drive. And this is the other one. This is an 18 terabyte Western Digital hard drive. So it's a data center DC HC550 hard drive. So we will set that right there. Newegg ships their bare drives in just boxes with not even a whole lot of bubble wrap. You know, if you go back in this channel, one of my earlier videos was unboxing a 2 terabyte Seagate hard drive, and it came wrapped in a lot of bubble wrap. This thing was not wrapped in nearly as much. And in fact, one side of the box basically has no bubble wrap on it at all. So if this is damaged, then I will consider it fully Newegg's fault for that bad packing. And that's exactly why I'm opening these tonight, is just to pop them into my drive toaster and make sure that they do spin up and everything. Like I said, I'm not going to have time to format them tonight, but I needed to make sure that they actually will work. Once I make sure they work, I'm going to pop it into the NAS, and I'll probably just skip showing you guys the testing and just show you once I actually put them in the NAS, unless they end up not working. So here's the Seagate drive. And so that is a Seagate Exos hard drive. So both of these are data center class hard drives. That means they are going to maybe use up a little bit more power. This one's actually, it's got some scotch tape or something on it. No, it just kind of looked like it did, but it doesn't actually have tape on it. I was wondering if it might be refurbished or something. But these are both directly purchased from Newegg. Neither of them are from the Newegg marketplace. They're from Newegg themselves. I did that just to make sure that if I have to do anything with the warranty in the future, the warranty is going to go through Newegg and not the manufacturers, since these are OEM drives. So I wanted to make sure that I was dealing with a reputable party and not just any random Amazon or Newegg marketplace seller. So here's the third box, and this is going to be our RAM, and it's just 2 sticks of RAM rubber banded together and some airbags that have popped long ago. So Newegg was really being lazy. I'm really bagging on Newegg in this video because they've done a horrible job with all of their packaging and delivery for all of these products in this video. So once again, if any of this is broken, then I need to make sure I open a claim on it within the next week or so to make sure that I don't get out of the first 30-day period. But yeah, we've got 2 sticks of RAM, 2 32 gigabyte memory modules. and then I'll fill the other 2 slots up later in the future sometime when I end up getting more hard drives. But yeah, these are the drives that we're going to place into the machine. Like I said, they're data center drives. I did that because they're a lot cheaper and because I don't mind that they're louder. The part of where I'm putting this machine, I might have mentioned, I'm putting the machine in my bedroom to provide white noise. So if the drives are a little bit louder, that's perfectly fine. My number 1 concern is reliability, and my number 2 concern is I guess power usage. Actually, number 2 concern would be price, and then 3 is power usage, 4 is sound. So yeah, data center drives should be perfectly fine. So hopefully both of these work, and if they do, I'll see you in the next clip when I have the last of the parts to actually finish this build. So those were the hard drives and the RAM for this build. One of those drives actually was defective. The Seagate drive did not spin up, it just buzzed. So I opened a claim with Newegg for that Seagate drive, I got it replaced, and you might hear me refer to that offhandedly in the next few clips. Now in this next portion of the video, I'm going to be installing the operating system, and as I'll talk about, I used Debian 11 for this build. From the start, I intended to use ZFS as the file system for this NAS. And ZFS works relatively well on Linux, but it is not part of the Linux kernel. Due to licensing issues, it can't actually be included in Linux. It has to be an extra portion put on top of Linux outside of the kernel. And what that means is that kernel updates can sometimes break the ZFS module because the ZFS developers aren't part of the kernel development, and every time the kernel gets updated, whenever anything that ZFS hooks into is changed, ZFS has to update itself to adapt to those kernel changes. For that reason, a rolling release distribution would not be suitable for a system that is depending on ZFS. Now, it can be done. My desktop here is on Arch Linux, and I do have a ZFS array in that, but I run into issues sometimes where I have to hold back kernel updates until the next ZFS update is available because there's a portion of time after a kernel update when ZFS would break with that kernel. So to get around that, if you're running a server that you're using ZFS on, you're going to want to use something that doesn't update its kernel version as often. And for that, I chose Debian. Ubuntu would also be a sane choice for this if you're planning on using snap packages. I don't know anyone who would plan to use snap packages. I prefer Debian over Ubuntu because it is maintained by an open community. It's not maintained by a for-profit company like Ubuntu is. And for that reason, Debian's policies, its governance, is just a little bit more open. They're less likely to do things like including snaps by default that Canonical is happy to go and start doing. Debian doesn't include Canonical's advertising in your bashrc file by default. And so I just see Debian as a little bit more of an open alternative to Ubuntu. Ubuntu is perfectly open, and like I said, it would be a sane choice. Debian just has a little less bloat on it by default, and for this system in particular, I wanted to really build everything from the ground up. So I'm going to install Debian in this next clip. Now, toward the end of the clip, I did have some trouble getting networking configured. Basically, I installed Debian, got everything working. I'm going to go through all of the UEFI firmware settings on this system, basically the BIOS settings, and configure what I want enabled and disabled in the firmware. And then I'm going to go back into Debian. The networking is not going to work anymore. Now, I threw some arrows on the screen pointing at hints that you can use to try and figure out what's wrong, see if you can spot what my mistake was or what I broke before I figure it out in the video. So without further ado, let's install the operating system. All right, guys, just jumping in here in the middle of booting this thing up. All right, so we're gonna select UEFI and Avera. Welcome to Grub. Okay, all right. And I should plug in network as well. All right, guys, having a very late night tonight. Make sure that our screen is here. Let's get a better angle. So it is currently about midnight, and it's Thursday night, so I do have to work tomorrow. But as you can see, I currently have the NAS here on a desk. It is not really all assembled, but all of the major components are in. I also have a gigantic Vega 56 shoved in there. As you can see, it barely fit. It was very difficult to get that in there. My desktop that Vega is normally in is powered off. And we're just going to go ahead and install Debian here. Debian 11. Getting the latest and greatest as far as Debian goes. Alright, so English, US, American. So I wanted to go with Debian for this system because I wanted something Linux-based. You know, ZFS is kind of BSD native, but I'm more comfortable in a Linux system, and so especially if I'm doing administration on this thing remotely, I'm going to want to have all my normal Linux tools there. I'm not going to want to have to worry about any BSD specific stuff that might be going on. So that's also why I'm not doing free NAS or true NAS, whatever they're calling it these days. Okay, so the host name for this system is going to be, let me make sure I'm spelling this right. Oh, of course my Wi-Fi's out because my desktop normally provides Wi-Fi. It's SIBYL, Sybil System. And let's see. I think we'll go ahead and capitalize it. Continue. Domain name. Not gonna set that right now. Okay. All right, our current time zone is Mountain Time, unfortunately. And we are going to use an entire disk for our operating system. This is just for the OS, and we're going to use that 970 Evo Plus that we have in there. Both of our hard drives are detected right now, which is great. I'm going to put everything into one partition. Finish partitioning, write changes. So I will be installing ZFS for Linux on this thing. I use ZFS already on my Arch Linux system, and it does break every now and then, but it's very, very rare, and so on a Debian system, the kernel is going to be changing much less often, and it should be even more rare that it breaks. It doesn't actually break anymore on my Arch system because I've figured out how to not update my kernel until ZFS is supporting it. But yeah, once again, that won't really be a concern once we are on Debian here. So yeah, the hard drive, the Seagate hard drive, the first one that I got was defective. All that it did was it buzzed, it didn't spin up. The second drive that I got, it did spin up, but my hard drive dock was not finding it. Let's see, United States, deb.debian.org. That's fine. So yeah, I was very concerned. I thought that I got a second dud drive, and I actually emailed Newegg Business and requested an RMA already. But I decided to try the drive. I tried 2 different power cables and 2 different data cables with my hard drive dock. No usage survey. All right, so we're not going to install any GUI on this thing. We are going to install an SSH server, and standard system utilities is fine. We probably want that. But yeah, we are not, I'm going full server mode with this thing. We're not installing a desktop environment at all. Oh wait, Debian desktop environment, no. Yeah, not doing a desktop environment, just the SSH server and our system utilities. Continue. So yeah, I tried 2 different USB cables. I was using a 2.0 cable at first. I went and got a 3.0 cable because it's a 3.0 dock. I was concerned because the hard drive was not showing up in LSUSB or anything on the computer. The first drive, I don't think the first drive was showing up in LSUSB either. It might have been showing up in LSUSB, but not FDisk or LSBOK. But yeah, the second drive, it wasn't showing up in anything. But I dug out an older, cheaper hard drive adapter that I happen to have. All right, we're going to continue here. And yeah, the hard drive was detected when I plugged it into that one. So it must have just been some weird compatibility quirk with my dock. Not super happy about that, but the drive is not going to be in the dock. The drive is always going to be in this particular NAS. And so if it works in the NAS, that's good enough for me. I'm going to go ahead and unplug our Debian installation medium. Okay, and so we've got, looks like it will wait about 5 seconds right now before it boots Debian. And we normally won't have any sort of graphics on this machine at all, but our Sybil login, Jacob. Okay, so if I do let's just do a sudo lsbok. Sudo is not found, okay. Guess that's not part of our standard system utilities. apt install sudo, exit, sudo apt, sudo lsblk. All right, have to configure sudo here. All right, we do have nano, so that's good. So it looks like the sudo group is the name of the group that we're using here. Sudo add, usermod a g jacob sudo jacob. Come on. Have to relog in. There we go. Sudo lsblk. Both of our drives are detected, which is wonderful. Sudo fdisk-l. They are both detected. And it looks like our Seagate drive is the SDA right now. And we normally won't be referring to them with their just random letter names. We'll normally be using UUIDs. But for now, if I do a sudo smart ctl-a dev sdb, smart mon tools, definitely going to want the smart tools on a NAS. Okay. All right. So yeah, this is our Western Digital drive, and I ran actually a full extended test. You can see the first one I aborted, the second one completed without error, and that did run for a decent amount of time. So then if we do dev sda, this is going to be our Seagate drive. Yeah, our start-stop count is about 15 because of how many times it took me to try and use the drive when it wasn't being detected by the OS. Looks like our temperature's fine right now. So yeah, I am going to run a full test. Right now though, I want to get out of this environment. I want to set up networking, and then I want to go ahead and switch back over to my desktop. So what's our IP address right now? 141. And systemctl status sshd, that is running. Okay, so let me just make sure. Actually, there's not really much I can do there. So this is 141 right now, right? Yeah, so we will just try and SSH back into that once I put the graphics card back into my main machine, and then I'll start a smart test. While we have the graphics card in, the last thing I want to do is just take a look through our BIOS settings just to make sure there's nothing that I would want to change, because that is the one thing that would be more difficult to do through the OS. So this is either going to be F2 or delete. The hard drives are quite loud, but I kind of knew that would be coming. All right, so this is our BIOS, so I want to look through this one more time. So all 64 gigabytes of our RAM are detected. That's good. I hadn't had a chance to test the RAM out yet, and I got that about a month ago, so glad that that's not defective. So overclock mode, auto or manual, I'm just going to leave that alone. Let's see. This is the tweaking page. I guess I don't need anything in the tweaking page. So we'll go over to advanced CPU configuration. CPU virtualization is enabled. Symmetric multi-threading. S3 is not supported on systems when SMT is disabled. Interesting. Well, we'll leave it auto. S3 would be suspend. We're not going to be suspending the thing anyway. Enabled or disabled our trusted platform module. Interesting. I don't think I need the trusted platform module right now. If we wanted it, then we could use it. CPU. Actually, let me just look this up. Like I said, we're not going to want to have to deal with any of this again. Yeah, so the FTPM is going to be a firmware trusted platform module, not a physical chip. You know, I'm just going to leave it alone, actually. If we ever find a need for a trusted platform module, then we can... Alright, yeah, I'm overthinking this because of all the Windows stuff. We're not putting Windows on this machine, but I'm like, oh, well, I want the software TPM. We'll just leave it alone for now. Okay, we can configure our RGB stuff. We're not going to ever see any of the RGB stuff, I don't think. Actually, no, the case does have a window in it, I suppose. What does strobe do? I don't see anything changing here. We're just going to leave that all alone. Back in advanced PCIe configuration, single root IO virtualization support. Please go to boot page to disable CSM. I wasn't really wanting CSM enabled. Did we have it enabled on accident? I think we installed in UEFI mode. Boot up numlock, that's fine. We just won't touch any of this. PCIe configuration though. Might as well enable that. WAN radio. It might be good to have Wi-Fi connectivity as a backup here. I didn't think that this thing had Wi-Fi actually. Do we want that? I guess not. I guess we don't really. If this thing ever goes offline, we're going to have people who are able to plug into it. So we'll turn all of the wireless off just for better security. PS2 Y cable, not sure what that means. Restore on AC power loss. We want to power on after AC power loss because this is a server. Yeah, HCI mode for our SATA controllers. Oh, we can enable or disable SATA power on each individual port. That's interesting. We do want it all to be on auto. And then NVMe configuration, there's no configuration there. ACPI configuration, suspend to RAM, sure. Enable wake on LAN. This thing really should never be going to sleep. So I don't care too much about any of the suspend options. Trusted computing. Actually, this. Trusted computing. Yeah, no security device found, so we don't have a discrete TPM. I think we're good with the firmware version. Thunderbolt support. This thing has a Thunderbolt port, right? Let's enable that. Security level. User authorization should be good. Linux supports that. I guess I was just talking about how we don't want wireless on for security reasons, but I'm just turning Thunderbolt on for some reason. But I might want to use that in the future for hosting eGPUs or things like that. We don't want to do overclocking on this machine. Not going to want a BIOS password on this. All of our security will be in software. Yeah, CSM, we can get faster boot speed. I mean, let's just disable CSM. I used to be a CSM person, but I've gotten used to UEFI at this point, so we'll leave that. We'll go in all UEFI mode. I'm still thinking about the TPM thing. Do I want a firmware TPM? Will it cause more problems in the future? It'll probably just cause problems. I probably shouldn't do it. We definitely don't have a hardware TPM on this. Let's just turn on the FTPM. We'll see if we ever have problems, then I can try and turn it off. So we'll save changes and exit. Now we'll just make sure that it boots into the OS still. And if it does, then we'll shut down and attempt to SSH in from my computer, my desktop, after putting our GPU back in the desktop. And then I will start a smart test to run overnight, because that takes a while. Well, that's a great sign. We've got no video after setting our BIOS settings. I thought I was competent enough to not mess the whole system up. We're plugged into the same GPU port as we were before. How did I mess this up? How did I mess it up so badly? I guess I'll do a hard power cycle here. Why are we don't even get a BIOS splash screen anymore. What? There, okay, well, we got this again. Boot. You may also disable CSM for faster boot speed. I'm gonna guess that that's what messed it up. We'll turn CSM back on. Yeah, that's what did it. Okay, well, I'm a bit confused. Yeah. I'm just going to check to make sure that we are installed in UEFI mode. If we are, then I'll leave CSM enabled and that should be fine. I don't know if it's the GPU that doesn't support UEFI or something. I would have thought the GPU supported UEFI. I do want to make sure that we're installed in UEFI mode, which we booted. Alright, ls sys class firmware. Oh, it's sys firmware. EFI vars. Yep, we are booted in EFI mode. Okay, I think that's going to do it for us. Okay, we're going to call that good. So our IP address is... why are we not connected to the internet? And the machine is spinning its fans at full speed. So I turned it off. Let's go back into the BIOS. I think we've messed more up than I thought. We will walk back some of those changes we made so we get this working. Okay, let's undo some of the stuff that we just set. I hate computers. Alright, so PCI configuration. I think that's fine. Right, boot, we've got CSM enabled. We can turn that TPM back off, and that says Wi-Fi module, not Ethernet. Alright, let's just try saving with the TPM off again and see if that helps us at all. Why? We had networking before. I don't understand what has changed. Failed to get interface index, no such device. Oh, DH client. ENP3S0. Well, there's only one. Oh, I think I know what happened. I think when I disabled the LAN, it probably changed the name of the interface. When I disabled the wireless card, it bumped up our wired. System CTO restart networking. Well, it's actually taking a moment to load, so that's more promising. There we go. All right, and we are at 142. Okay, we're going to leave everything exactly how it is right now. I am going to power off this machine. Okay, and I'm going to now take the GPU out of this machine. I'm going to put it back in my desktop, and then I'm going to SSH in and start that smart test. So I'm here on my desktop. I am accessing the control panel for my router. It's a Ubiquiti Edge Router 4. I did an unboxing video when I got this router. And right now what I'm going to do is set up a static IP address for this server. I'm about to disconnect it, and I'm going to finish up the hardware in the server. So before I do that, I want to make sure I know what IP address it's going to come back to when I plug it back in, because I don't want to have to connect a display and a graphics card and everything into that machine again. So I'm going to go over to the services section in the router control panel, and I've got DHCP running here. So I'm going to go to Actions and Configure Static Map. This Ubiquiti router is really easy to use. You know, I am trained in Cisco IOS, which is a command line operating system for routers, and I did take a look at the command line interface on this Edge router when I first got it, but typically I just use the control panel because it is very extensive and very easy to do all the things that I need to do. So as you can see, I've got two mappings set up right now. The first one is my desktop, and that one is set to 192.168.0.2. That might seem like a strange decision, having such a low number there. .1 is the router, and so .2, I mean, in terms of how I'm thinking, it's just the second most critical piece of infrastructure on my network. I always want to remember how to get back to the desktop from other devices when I need to do that. And then next, I've got my serval set to .3. Now, the serval I actually don't use as much anymore, so that maybe doesn't need to be mapped, but it still is, and it's still kind of nice to know that when I'm plugged into this network, that's where it's going to go. So I'm going to click Create New Mapping, and it's going to ask me for three things: an ID, a MAC address, and an IP address. So at this point, I am going to SSH into Jacob at 192.168.0.142, I think. Yeah, that looks like that was the server's IP address. So for the ID in the router, it doesn't read a host name. It doesn't have a way to read a host name from a device, but we're just going to put the same name into the ID field so that I remember what this mapping is for. And then I'm going to run IP link. That is going to give us our link layer information, so our layer 2 information, such as our MAC address, which is right here. I'm going to copy that, and we will paste that over into the MAC address field. And then our IP address right now, we're at 142. That's kind of a random in the middle of my pool number, so I don't want it to stay at 142. So trying to think how I want this to be set up here, what I actually want the IP address to be. I've got .2 and .3 set, so I could just make this .4, or I can make it something more easy to remember, such as .5. The range end is .254, so I could make it .254 if I wanted to. I think for now I'm going to make it .5, just because that's kind of an easy to remember number. 192.168.0.5 is going to be our NAS, and then that way if I ever get another computer or something that I'm having plugged in, I can set that to .4, so I've got a little bit of space there. So our NAS for now is going to be 192.168.0.5. Now I'm not going to open this thing up to the internet yet. I am going to get it all set up how I want to first before I open any ports up, but when I do that, that's going to be really easy to do here in the router interface as well. I'm just going to end up going over to my firewall and NAT section, and then here under the port forwarding tab, I'll just add a new rule for any port that I want to forward, and I'll just set the forward to address to .5 then for anything that I'm wanting to forward to the NAS. You can see I've got a few ports forwarded currently to my desktop just for some torrenting things that I've done in the past. Alright, so that was the OS install and the network setup on my router. Finally, the last part of this video is finishing the hardware of the project. I really wanted to wrap the hardware because I didn't feel confident fully diving into the software until I knew the hardware wasn't going to change anymore. Now, this is the longest portion of the video, and for me, I'm more of a software person. Not sure how entertaining it's going to be watching me wire up this thing, but I'm actually very happy with the way the NAS turned out. Physically, it looks really nice. So in this last section, I'm going to install the last couple of fans. I'm going to get all of the cable management set up the way that I want it, and that will end off part 2 of the video. So I hope you enjoy it. Alright guys, and we are finally here. This is going to hopefully be the last segment of this video where we are dealing with the hardware of this NAS. As you can see, I've got cables spilling out of it. Oh, I've actually got cables sitting underneath it. There we go. I've had this thing running for a couple days now, running the extended smart tests on one of the hard drives. Let me spin this thing around and tell you what I've been doing. First of all, I've got 2 GPU cables here in the machine because I had my Vega 56, my secondary GPU for my desktop, in this NAS so that I could install Debian and get the initial IP address for me to SSH into. The Vega 56 actually barely fit in this thing. I had to really smush the cables against the front of the machine to fit that card in here. I forget how big that card is because my desktop computer's case is so large. I don't have to think about it with that one. But after spinning this thing around, you can see we do now have 2 hard drives populated in here. I'm very excited that we have both of our starting drives. Obviously, there will be more in the future, but for right now, it's great to have 2 functioning drives. I can finally start actually using this NAS. So the first drive, just to recap, this is a Western Digital DC550. It's a data center class hard drive from Western Digital, and it is 18 terabytes. The physical design of the drive looks very similar to the newer WD Red design. It's a little bit cheaper than the WD Reds. It uses a little bit more power and might be a little louder, but it comes with a 5-year warranty. It has a 2.5 million hour mean time between failure. It is a data center class drive, and I am very confident in that drive to hold my data. Now, the one that I'm slightly less confident in is the Seagate drive. Now, just to recap, I'm doing software RAID using ZFS on this box. So the drives do not need to match in specifications. We want them to be roughly the same because I am going to be putting them into RAID 1. So any extra space on one drive that the other one doesn't have would be wasted. So we want them to at least be the same size. They're both 18 terabytes. But I went with 2 drives from 2 different manufacturers just to spread out my risk of a drive failing. A common thing with NASs, or at least a common story with NASs, is that if you have the same model of hard drive for all of your drives, when one of them fails, if they all have a similar load being placed on them, then the other ones probably aren't too far behind in failure. If they were made in the same factory, especially if they were made at the same time and they're using the same design, it's possible for all of your drives to fail at once, which can completely invalidate the point of a NAS. You know, the point of this NAS, RAID is not a backup solution, but we are going to be using RAID to protect against individual drive failures. So we want to spread that risk out so that when one drive fails, we can be reasonably confident the other one won't fail at the same time. So for my second drive, I went with a Seagate Exos X18 18 terabyte hard drive. And both of these are as large as consumer hard drives get these days. You can't get to 20 terabytes yet, although both Seagate and Western Digital are currently starting to ship the initial 20 terabyte drives to their enterprise customers. Now, the Seagate Exos drive, I've had one hard drive fail in my life so far, and it was a Seagate drive. It was a Barracuda 2 terabyte drive that was in one of my older desktops. So Seagate does not have the best reputation in my mind to start with. Now, Newegg sent me both of these. I ordered them from separate Newegg accounts, but I ordered them at the same time. One of them was my business account, the other was my consumer account. The drives actually ended up on the same UPS truck and arriving at the same time. Now, initially, I put both drives into the drive toaster on my desk. I've got a little hard drive dock that I used to use a lot more often before I had a lot of storage in my desktop. And I put the Western Digital drive into that drive dock, and it spun up. And I ran an extended smart test, and it took about 2.5 days, and it worked, and it passed the smart test. Now, the Seagate drive that I initially received, I put it into that dock, and all that it did was it buzzed. When I turned the dock on or plugged the dock in, the drive would just go bzz, bzz, bzz. and then it would stop, and then 30 seconds later it would buzz 3 times again. So basically it seemed like some kind of mechanical or electronic failure. I'm not really sure. I didn't open it up to diagnose it because that would void the warranty. But I immediately opened up an RMA request with Newegg Business that one came from. And I sent that one back, and I had them send me a replacement drive. Now I want to mention the original Seagate drive that I got. I did consider, maybe my dock just doesn't work with this enterprise class drive. Because holding these things, the Western Digital drive actually feels very similar to my other Western Digital red drives. The Seagate drive, you can see, it's got a very industrial look to it. It's got more rounded edges in all of the metal. And I thought, maybe this isn't a normal drive. Maybe it needs more power or a more direct data connection or something that my dock might not be providing. So I threw it into the NAS, the original drive, and I powered the NAS on. I didn't plug in a display, but I did power it on. And once again, the old Seagate drive, it just buzzed. So I knew for sure that one was actually dead. So I had Newegg send me this replacement. And initially, when I put the replacement into the dock, this one, it did spin up. It made some very loud clicking sounds, which is normal for these enterprise drives. But it was kind of scary because, hard drives and clicking, you never know, especially when a drive is brand new, if that's normal or if that means it's broken. It made some very loud clicking sounds, and it was not detected by my computer at all. It was not an LS-USB. If a drive's not in fdisk-L or in LSBLK, then the drive is probably dead, but it might still show up in LS-USB if the actual electronic circuit is still working, even if the platters are messed up. But in this case, it was not showing up at all. The hard drive dock was not showing up in LS-USB. And I know the dock works. I've got another hard drive back in it now, and it's working. But yeah, I thought, Newegg sent me a second bad drive in a row. And their packaging was absolutely terrible for all of these drives. I mentioned earlier in the video, I might have mentioned that I will never feel bad again about ordering from Amazon instead of Newegg. I will go with whoever is cheapest. Generally, I used to try to buy from Newegg to support a computer parts distributor over Amazon, which is just kind of the Walmart of the internet. But Newegg really has gone downhill both with their customer service and with their packaging because, these drives, the amount of bubble wrap they used wasn't even enough to wrap around the entire drive. One side of the drive, even the replacement, was exposed to the side of a box that UPS is going to be throwing around during their shipping. So I was a little concerned, and I thought that this drive was dead. However, this time I didn't put it into the NAS, but I actually broke out another adapter that I had. It was a USB 2.0 SATA adapter, and that one worked. It detected the drive, it spun up. It takes about 30 seconds after it's powered on before it's fully spun up and ready to go. But my desktop did recognize the drive. And so after that, I was like, okay, maybe it was just the dock this time. So I put that one in the NAS, and sure enough, it spins up, which I don't like that it doesn't work in my standard dock because I've never had a drive that dock failed with before. I know it's not the size because the other drive of the same size worked fine. But ultimately, the drive, I bought it to go in this NAS. And so if it works in the NAS, it will work for my needs. And so I ran the extended smart test actually on the NAS, and it took a little bit less time than the Western Digital drive took to run the same extended smart test. It took about a day and a half. And it passed that smart test, and so I'm saying, you know what, we're good to go. I actually had emailed and left a voicemail with Newegg Business already after I thought the drive was dead, which of course, egg on my face. But at this point, I'm fairly confident the drive is working now. If it ever stops in the future, I did check the warranty with Seagate is valid, and so I will take it up with them. All right, so that's everything that's been going on with the drives, and that's where I'm at. So that's why I had the GPU in here, and that's why the drives are actually wired up, is because I was making sure the system could power both of them. They're actually plugged into the same SATA power cable right now. And yeah, everything seems to be in order. So in this video, in this segment, which we're already 14 minutes into, I'm going to be finishing up the wiring. This wiring is terrible right now. We've got wires everywhere. I've also got some new parts to throw in here. These will be the last parts that we're unboxing. So let me go through, I guess, what I've picked up here from Amazon. These are 3 Noctua boxes, as you may have been able to tell. And here is my cooling plan for this system. The system does support fans on the top for exhaust. However, on the hard drive side, you cannot put fans on the top unless you take the hard drive bays out, which would defeat the purpose of having fans in here if there are no hard drives for them to cool, and it would defeat the purpose of the entire build because I need these hard drive mounts. Those are why I purchased this case. So I cannot put any fans on top here. That's perfectly fine. Like I mentioned before, there's plenty of space between the drives for air to go through from front to back in the case. Now this case has, on each side of the partition, it has 2 fan mounts in the front and 1 fan mount in the back. Now on the hard drive side of the partition, which you're looking at right now, the back fan, they shipped a 120mm fan stock in here from Fractal Design. However, the mount can support up to a 140mm fan. The 2 front fans on this side can only go up to 120mm. So I picked up 2 fans. I got one 140mm that's going to go in the back here. I'm going to move this included 120mm fan to the front, and I'm going to put that on the bottom. And then I've got another 120mm fan that I'm going to put on the top and the front. So the compute side of this case, it's going to keep the 2 120mm fans that shipped in this thing. That combined with the cooler's fan, it should be fine for cooling that side of the case. I'm more concerned about hard drive longevity, so I really want to make sure that the hard drive side is cooled. I'm not skimping out on the other side. 2 fans is plenty. We've got an intake and an output. But on this side, we're going to have 2 intakes and 1 output. The output's going to be larger, so we should have plenty of airflow, and if we're lucky, we might even get a little bit of positive pressure in the case, which is always good to help keep dust and things being pushed out of the case rather than being sucked in. So for the fans, I got Noctua Redux fans. Now Noctua is a pretty name brand fan company, and I didn't want to cheap out. You know, there's not any part of this build that I've seriously cheaped out on. The whole point here is that I'm being pragmatic, and I'm getting the best that I actually need. And so I didn't want to cheap out on the fan. I looked up, I could have gotten some matching Fractal Design fans for maybe a couple dollars cheaper, but Noctua is a very well-known fan company, and I wanted very good fans, especially in the hard drive section of this case. I didn't want fans that are going to fail in a few years, maybe when I'm not around to service this thing, because that would be a huge hassle for me and everyone involved. So I got these Noctua Design fans. Now their Redux line is cheaper than their normal flagship line, I'll call it. So their flagship fans have a very distinctive tan and brown color scheme, and their flagship fans are actually quite expensive, that you can pay $35 to $40 for a single fan. The Redux line is about half the price of their flagship line, and the Redux line is basically just older models that they have recolored and are selling now under a slightly different lineup. So this is the box. It's not too exciting. I'm just going to open this thing up, and inside of here you can see our 140mm fan. So the Redux line uses a gray color scheme, which is going to go better in this case anyway. And all that we really get in the box here is the fan, which is sticking onto this cardboard or plastic piece by its cable that I'll dig that out of there in a second here. And then we also have a bag of screws, and that's it. That's all that we get with this fan. So Noctua's flagship fans, you tend to get a lot of accessories, and part of the reason they're able to sell these older models for cheaper isn't just because they're older models, but it's because they're not including the Y splitter cables and the rubberized mounts and all the other extra goodies that you would get with a flagship fan. But I don't need most of that anyway. I did measure, and these fans will be able to plug directly into the motherboard. Both the new fans I picked up are PWM 4-pin fans. The difference between a 3-pin and a 4-pin fan, here, let me get the actual fan while I'm talking about this. The difference between a 3-pin and a 4-pin fan connector is that the 3-pin fan connector controls the fan speed by changing the amount of power it's providing to the fan. The 4-pin fan connector, the 4th pin actually acts as a data cable, and the fan has a little controller inside of it that sets the speed based on what you request, and then it draws the appropriate amount of power from the power supply. So both 3-pin and 4-pin fans can have their speed controlled, but 4-pin fans, because they are operating with a little computer in the fan, or circuitry at least, they're a little bit more accurate when it comes to controlling speed. So comparing the Redux fan to the flagship 140mm fan that Noctua currently sells, the biggest difference is that there are more blades on this one. This is more of a traditional number of fan blades. It matches basically what Fractal Design's models had. The newer flagship model has less blades and they might be a little bit bigger, but then this Redux model has some teeth in the fans. The newer flagship model is actually a bit smoother. It has teardrop shapes imprinted into the fan blades to help guide airflow and keep noise down. The older models that are now being sold as Redux, they went with these sharp tooth edges instead to help slice through the air and cut down on noise. So this one's going to go in the back. Right here, we've got our 120mm fan, and this is the one that's going to go in the front. And then here, I did pick up one more thing. Like I said, the Redux fans don't come with all the same accessories as the flagships do. You have to buy the accessories separately if you need them. These are rubber mounts And that was a little too difficult to get that box open. But these are just rubberized fan mounts, and they are fitted to the corners of all of these Noctua fans. There's what one looks like up close. So what these do is you actually stick them into the corners on the fans, and then that way when you screw the fan into the case, it actually acts as a shock absorber. And one of the reasons people get these things is because they help cut down on noise. By reducing the vibration from the fan to the rest of the case and vice versa, you are letting the fan operate without worrying about all the vibration going on. And that can remove buzzing that you might get with a normally mounted fan. Now, the reason I got these wasn't necessarily for sound, but it was for that vibration itself. These are going to be on the hard drive side of this computer, and the hard drives are already going to be clicking away and making vibrations. And so I'm not going to cut down on vibrations 100%, but I figured it was just a few dollars to get these rubberized mounts, and I might as well do anything I can to cut down on the amount of vibration between the hard drives and the fans in either direction. It should improve the longevity of the hard drives and of the fans. Worst case scenario, it does nothing and I'm out like $6. But best case scenario, this actually helps our fans and or our hard drive last longer. So that's everything going on the cooling front here. So at this point, I really do need to just dig in here and get started. Got a microfiber cloth. I am going to kind of wipe a lot of this thing off because this computer has gotten dusty from sitting on my floor for so long. This build really has been a long-term thing. It's been extremely long-term. So we've got a nest of cables here that I am going to have to rectify. So in order to easily unplug those, I am going to just unscrew the thumb screws for this Seagate drive, and I am going to slide that tray out just partially. And I'll unplug the power cable first. So the trays do come out, and the Seagate drive I am mounting as close to the center of the back fan as I can, just to help the impedance. There's going to be impedance from these drives for the back fan, and so I wanted to cut down on any balance issues that might occur from that. So this drive in the back bracket is going to be closer to the center of the fan. And then the front one I have staggered. It is in the third slot back. That way they can both get their own air kind of separately, and the hot air from the front drive hopefully won't always be flowing over the back drive. The back drive will be able to get its own cool air. All right, and at this point, I'm going to have to stop narrating and really just dig in here and work with cables. I want to make this thing look good, so this might be sped up or it might be cut. We'll have to see how it turns out. Actually, I am going to take the entire tray out because I want to go ahead and put those fans in. I'll need to do that anyway. And these fan mounts, they do fit on the fans. The mounting is a little bit weird. The corner of that rubber doesn't exactly have anywhere to go in the fan. The Noctua website was a little confusing. The page for the actual fan mounts did not list the Redux fans as compatible, but the page for the Redux fans listed the fan mounts as compatible. Oh, you know what? That makes more sense. I was trying to shove all of the rubber inside the fan. Looks like a flap of that rubber is actually supposed to go outside the fan. Okay, never mind. They actually fit perfectly. So I'm only going to be putting 4 of these mounts onto each fan because I only need the rubber mounts on the side that's attached to the chassis. With the remaining ones, I might see if I can shove them onto the Fractal Design fans, even though they're not meant for those. And I'm going by the arrows printed on the fan here to determine which side should be blowing the air out of the case for the back fan. All right, and we have 4 fan mounts successfully all placed onto the fan. So that's looking very nice. And I'm going to orient this, I think, so that the fan cable is closest to the side of the case where it needs to plug in into the motherboard. I probably should string that through before I screw this in, just to make sure that that's how I'm going to want it. All right, so let's move the case back around. And this is our fan cable. And so our fan splitter, we're going to use the fan splitter for the 3 included Fractal Design fans, but those only support up to 3 pins. So we're going to be plugging both Noctua fans directly into the motherboard, and that will let us control it through software and things like that anyway. So there's no harm in doing that. Okay, so chassis fan 1, there's actually a plug right in the corner here. I'm gonna plug this in, and then that way I think we can actually rotate the fan on the other side so that there's not so much slack. All right, that's plugged in. Yeah, it's a good thing I did that. So now we know that we can actually probably mount this fan here, except we want it pointed that way. All right, so I think we can go ahead and mount it in this orientation. That'll be great. All right. And in case you're wondering, Noctua does also sell rubber fan mounts that you can actually use in place of the metal screws. I did decide I don't actually need those for this particular build. They wouldn't have been worth the extra few dollars. I think the rubber mounts will do fine for reducing vibration. Alright, so I've got more of the rubber mounts than I need. Like I said, these aren't meant to go on Fractal Design fans, but the Fractal Design fans, they have sort of cutouts or indentations where rubber can go for mounting them on the corners. And so I think the biggest thing is that the pins aren't needed. Yeah, but I think I can actually cut off the little rubber extrusions there on 4 of these. Like I said, I have more than enough. And then I can just kind of stick those extra mounts over the Fractal Design fan. So I am gonna go ahead and take my pocket knife and do that. Actually, do I even need a knife or can I just pull these off? Oh, they are on there pretty good. I'll go with the knife. So I'll do this for just one of the pads first so that I minimize the amount that I'm destroying if it doesn't work. So once again, judging by our arrows, and it looks like for all of these fans, the spinning side is going to face the front of the case. The side with a stationary cover is going to face the back. So after cutting those nubs off, yeah, it doesn't fit perfectly, but I can sort of stick one of these rubber mounts onto the corner, and that way that will be just a little bit more isolated from the rest of the system. I think it's worth it to go ahead and do that. So I'm gonna cut those rubber pieces off of 3 more of these mounts, and then I will screw in our Fractal Design fan here. All right, so yeah, these don't fit perfectly or anything. They do kind of bulge out in the centers and they'll get pressed back down when I screw the fan in, but they're not just hanging on by a thread or anything. The back of the mounts actually do grab the back of the fan just a little bit. So that should be fine. Now I do need to figure out how I want to wire up these fans so that I know which orientation to put this in. I'm trying not to over-tighten the fans here. Over-tightening can actually cause more noise sometimes, creating friction inside of the fan. So this fan is probably going to be the trickiest for wiring because it is mounted in the front and it does need to plug directly into the motherboard. So I will once again need to figure out how that's going to go here. Oh, this is kind of a tight fit getting this fan in, actually. And it's because of the hard drive mount on the top of the case. Oh, there we go. I got it. Thought I might have to take either the hard drive mount or the lower fan out for a moment there, but very tight fit with that fan. But that's actually a good thing because that'll kind of hold it in place while I flip this around and figure out what we're doing with that wire. So we've got a CPU fan header up at the top right of the motherboard, but we want this going to a chassis fan header. These fan screws are a little tricky to get in, but I'm just going diagonally here. Getting one started, getting the other side started so that I know that they'll both line up. Oh. You don't want to hear cracking noises when you're screwing plastic in. So I'll be a little bit gentler with these last 2. Okay. So we've got the top fan oriented to give the cable as much slack as possible, and the bottom fan oriented to not give the cable quite as much slack. That's going to be everything we need to do from the front here, so I can put the dust filter back in and pop the front back on. That'll make this easier to work with. Boy, I'm glad there's a dust filter. I do wish they would have made it so that you pull it from the top instead of the bottom. Can I put it in backwards? No, it pops up. It sticks up too high if I put it in backwards. Kind of a bad design because you need to lean the thing off of a table like this or turn it sideways every time you want to change the filter out. And that's the kind of thing I was talking about before, where fractal design cases, they look nice, not that nice to work with, but it is looking nice at least. All right. I'm gonna try and stick this thing on here. Okay. And probably for the first time that I've ever done this, my current desktop, I tried to make it look nice with the wire routing, but I've never really done a lot of cable management in terms of tying things back. But I'm actually breaking out my arsenal here of things that came with this case. I've got some Velcro, I've got zip ties, and those are gonna look nicer than the bread twisty ties that I've got. So I am going to start tying some things back. Since I'm not using any of the top fan mounts, I can use those to hold wires up. All right, guys, and just a bit of a status update. We are getting very close. We're almost finished on this side. I still need to route a SATA power cable for the fan controller built into the chassis. But everything else here is routed. I can go ahead and put our 2 PCI slot covers back on since we won't be keeping a GPU in here for now. So far, I've used a surprising number of the zip ties. I've used almost all the zip ties. And it's a shame because I know I had more back at home in St. Louis, Missouri from last time I built a computer. But of course, I don't have any of those with me right now, so we'll have to make do with the bread ties and everything else that we do have here. I am going to leave a full set of GPU power cables in the machine just in case I ever do need to throw a GPU in here, just to make the process slightly less painful for myself in the future. In fact, why don't I go ahead and slightly untighten that second slot cover. There we go. I want those thumb screws loose enough that I can unscrew them by hand in the future if I ever need to, or if anyone else ever needs to. Yes, we've got the SATA power cable. That's gonna be the last thing, quite possibly the ugliest thing. Although that's coming from the power supply, which is also on the bottom of the case. So I might just route that along the bottom instead of the top. Of course, that would probably get in the way of our GPU if I did it in that direction. I'll have to figure out how to do that power cable. Now over on the other side, we're looking very clean, but that's because our hard drives aren't hooked up. Unfortunately, I've got 2 SATA cables, which is fine for my current needs, but I think that most of my SATA cables are also back in St. Louis, Missouri. I thought that I got more with the motherboard, but I was only able to find 2 when I was hooking the hard drives up the other day. One with a right angle connector and one with a 180 degree, just straight connector. So yeah, I think that some of those are also back in my home planet, which is a shame, but not the end of the world. We don't need them right now. I would have liked to be able to put all the SATA cables in just for in the future when I add more drives, but it doesn't look like we'll be able to do that right now. But that's okay. Right now I'm concerned about routing the power cables that we do have here and that we need. Let me go ahead and compare all of my SATA power cables just to see if they're all the same length or not. All right, so it looks like we've got at least one that is shorter. And this one has 3 connectors. We've got a slightly longer one with 4 connectors. I kind of wish that the fan connector used Molex instead of SATA. I could get an adapter or something, but I don't think I have one with me. Yet another thing I'm sure I have more of back at home. Okay, this is another 3 connectors, so we don't even have enough SATA power cables to hook up power for 8 SATA hard drives right now. Yeah, and looking at everything else I've got some more CPU and PCI cables, and then I've got one Molex connector. Or is this more than one? No, this is just one Molex connector, and this has 4 Molex connectors on a single cable. So yeah, this should be more than enough to power the fan controller, but they have not given me that option with the adapters in the box. So that's okay, we'll leave the Molex out for now, and we will just wire with what we have. In the future, I may switch the fan connector over to the Molex if I end up getting the full 8 hard drives in here and using more than the number of plugs that we've got. So for right now, since we don't have 8 full drives in here, what I'm going to do, I know it's going to be at least another year probably before I throw the next 2 hard drives in here. I'm going to try and wait until 20 terabyte hard drives are available before I add the second pair of drives. And then the third one is going to be even longer than that. So for now, I'm going to leave the 2 3-plug SATA power cables on the hard drive side, and we will use the longer 4-plug option for the fan controller. And maybe that will let us be a little bit nicer with our cable routing. Man, I'm really trying to figure out how this can work here. Getting this SATA adapter over here. I don't think I can actually leave a plug on top of this thing. I think this needs to be flat. I can check here if I've got that SATA cable on there. Will the case let me pop in the top? It seems like the case doesn't like that very much. Yeah, I think kind of fits, but I don't think I'm supposed to do that. Just to check to make sure I'm not just doing this wrong. If I take that plug out of the top, is this easier to put on now? Well, not really. And I hope it's not the zip ties that I put on that are the problem, but it probably is the zip ties. Yeah, because I've thrown a couple of zip ties. Maybe if I rotate that so that it's not blocking, will that help? Okay. That sort of helped. Once again, Fractal Design cases, they look nice, but they are not fun to work with. Okay, so that's what the top is going to look like. Yeah, some of the notches that hold the top on are a little dented up. So let me grab the fan's power connector again. And I see a SATA to Molex connector on the ground that's from one of my hard drive adapters. But I don't want to use that one because that goes to the adapter. That's not for this. But yeah, I think this is going to be too much to have on top of the case, so we're going to have to figure something else out here. Part of the problem, this connector is too wide to route through some of the holes here that are designed for fan routing. Well, let's grab our super long 4-connector SATA adapter here, and let's just feed that through to the other side. All right, SATA 1, SATA 2, SATA 3. Oh, and I don't want that routed around that other large motherboard power cable, so I'll pull that all back through. And we will route this through the right way. Okay. All right, so that's now going through as gracefully as it really can. So we've got lots of cable to work with on this side of the case. That is the good news. Yeah, if it wasn't a SATA adapter, if it wasn't so wide, then this would be a lot easier to figure out. Because I can't stick it really here, because that's going to get in the way of the side of the case. I can't stick it in front of the fan, that would get in the way of the fan. So I'm really going to have to route it behind the fan. I can set the adapter on top of the PCI slots. It's going to be a pain next time I need to put a GPU in. And I'm trying specifically not to block the GPU slots, because that was something I had to deal with when I put the Vega 56 in, was I had too many wires blocking the slot to actually plug it in. But I think if we want to go for like a corner thing here, if we just route this along the corners, you might be able to get away with that. The fan actually has a wiring channel built in that I can utilize, so that's kind of nice. All right, just route this once again around larger cables, so that it gets in the way less. So we don't want it on top of our audio cable there. Okay, yeah, this would be a lot nicer if it only had one SATA plug on the end as well instead of all four. But you know, I think we're getting close to figuring it out here. You know, I really don't need to keep the bottom of the case open because there's never gonna be any, we're not putting any intake fans on this thing. So I could use that for zip tying too. Once again, we just have to make sure that the GPU area isn't blocked. But yeah, I think our best bet is going to be something like this. So we're gonna tuck that SATA connector for the fan controller away over the PCI slots. Well, actually, I can zip tie, I can attach this to the fan, one of the fan mounts that's not in use. All right, maybe I can actually tie this down to the bottom of the case without even taking the bottom cover off. If I can just get a zip tie or something. We'll stay with our bread ties since those are more undoable. But if I can get one of these routed through some of the holes on the bottom of the case from up here. There we go. Okay. So we can actually tie a bunch of these down. All right. I am going to try not to cut the excess off of this particular bread tie. Once again, just because we don't know what's going to change in the future with this setup. We can utilize that better probably though. Okay, so not the absolute prettiest thing in the world, but you know, that looks pretty darn good. We now have no loose cables hanging around, nothing is blocking the air intake. Of course, there's no intake here, but nothing is blocking the CPU's exhaust here. Nothing is, well, we've got our motherboard power cable sort of blocking the intake fan on this side, but not much to be done about that. On the back, absolutely nothing is blocking the exhaust for the CPU partition of the case. So I think we are looking pretty good. All right, so now the last things we will need to route to this side of the case at all are those emergency graphics card cables. So I'll go ahead and find those. Actually, they're still in the system. They're right here. All right, so these, we want to feed them to the other side of the case, and then we want to Velcro them up. Speaking of Velcro, my Velcro ties on this hard drive partition are kind of being underutilized right now. All right, so this is looking really as clean as we can get it on this side for all of the cabling that's not actually used on the power supply side. So over here, all we need to do is figure out where we want these GPU cables to sit permanently. Basically, our options are we can have the GPU cables on top of everything so that they're easy to pull out and get to when we're putting a GPU in, or we can have them below everything so that they're as out of sight as possible. I think we're gonna try and go for on top of everything here, because the last thing we need in an emergency where we are putting a GPU in is unplugging other stuff on accident while we're pulling at those cables. All right, so we've got two very thick GPU cables here, and these are going to be Velcroed together using our large Velcro strips that I haven't used any of yet. And if I can, I'd like to even Velcro them to the bottom of the case a little bit. So while I'm holding these cables where I want them to end up, I'm actually gonna zip tie them or going to Velcro tie them together over on the opposite side of the case first. Okay, that hurt. Velcro is very prickly, but we are moving right along here to the side that you are now seeing. So I'll just try to zip tie these at strategic points so that they stay together at all times. And if I just said zip tie, I meant Velcro, but the Velcro has holes in it, so it actually works similar to zip ties. Looks like we've got 3 left after this. And I'm actually gonna cut one of these Velcro strips to cut down on the number of them that we're using, because I want to save some for the other side, for the hard drive power cables. So we'll see if this works. So we've got one there. We'll have another tie up here. Yeah, that'll be plenty. Put one at this seam here. And I'll put the last Velcro tie, I'll actually gonna cut one behind that too. Oh, maybe I'm not. Let's see, how many Velcro ties do we have left? We have 2 left now. So I'm going to leave this side open. I'm going to go and take care of our final stuff on the other side of the case. Then I'll come back. We'll decide how much Velcro we need to conserve. Back on the hard drive side, I keep flipping this thing back and forth. If I wasn't doing this on video, I've got a kitchen table, well, it's a card table, just in the middle of my living room here. And it would be easier to work on this on that table because then I'd be able to just walk around it instead of rotating it over and over again. So I did notice while getting those GPU cables through that there are some slots here that we can put ties through. So I think I'm gonna put a tie through one of those, just figuring out which kind I want to use. Maybe we want to start putting our SATA power cables in first. That might help guide my decision. Boy, you know, I normally don't think it's gonna be fun to do all this wiring stuff, but when you have time to actually think about it and do it well, it is kind of fun sometimes, making it look nice. So we're gonna have one of these power cables for the back hard drive bracket and one of the power cables for the front bracket. Now I need to decide how I want them routed, if I want them routed at all. We want the brackets to be able to be easily pulled in and out of the system. We need to be able to pull the bracket out without unplugging anything from it. So based on that, I'm thinking we might actually just stick these in here. I guess that's not gonna look super nice, but for what we're doing, that might be best actually. What if we braid these together? Is that a bad idea? That's probably a bad idea. Here's an idea. All right, I think that's gonna be as good as we can get, actually. Yeah, that's gonna be great. All right, let me just finish this, and then I'll take some pictures and explain exactly how it all works once it's finished, of course. While I still have these hard drive cages out, I did want to mention the Western Digital hard drives actually don't have screw holes in the middle of the drive. There's no screw hole behind this middle screw. And that's the reason why you see this white mount sticking out underneath it, because I actually screwed in this white mount on the bottom, I screwed it in on the top using this screw, and then I screwed in the mount to the bracket using that middle screw. If we take our Seagate drive cage out one more time, you can see I'm actually not using that mount. It was actually very difficult to get the mount in there. I almost thought I was doing something wrong when I was putting it in because it was very tight. And you can see that the Western Digital drive cage, the sides of the cage are kind of bulging outward because of that mount. There's really not a lot of space for it. I thought maybe the mount was for SSDs or something, but they're too large for SSDs, so I think I was using them for the intended purpose. But those mounts are optional, and if you have a drive like the Seagate one that does have middle screws, you can just screw the drive directly into the cage. The mount is metal. I don't see it adding a lot of vibration protection or anything like that. Okay guys, blood, sweat, and tears have been spilled as is usual with PC builds for me, but look at this. This is beautiful. I'll give you a better shot in a moment. We're all done with the cable management for our GPU cables over on the CPU side of the case. Last thing I'm gonna do before I put the cover on this side, I've got 4 of those rubber mounts left. I'm actually going to pop off the front of the case and stick these on the intake fan because why the heck not? The exhaust fan is not going to have them, and that's okay. I really only got them for the 2 Noctua fans that I bought. So at this point I'm figuring why the heck not throw those on there while we've got the case open. So I'm gonna do that real quick. Oh, and this is actually not the last thing. We still have to plug the SATA data cables in, which I keep forgetting about. Just wish there was a way to take the front of the case off without worrying about where it's going to go. That works, I guess. But now I can't get the dust filter off. Fractal Design cases look nice. They are not fun to work in, once again. Okay, good, and that didn't end up being too much of a pain. We didn't mess any of our wiring up. Who at Fractal Design thought it would be a good idea to design a case where you have to insert the dust filters from the bottom? Who thought that would be a good idea? I want to know what employee was personally responsible for that decision. Because they're an idiot. Christ. All right. Oh, good. I've scratched up the front of my case. Excellent. All right. This is why I would not recommend Fractal Design. to anyone. All right, the scratches mostly came off there. So everything is in except the SATA data cables. Like I said, we have only two, one for each drive right now. So that's all that we have to worry about cabling up. We want to route them such that we can copy that in the future. Flip this back around. Our longer cable will be for the drive that is farther away from the port, which is... The cables are basically the same length actually, but the right angle connector cable, the connector itself might be a little longer, or the cable's just ever so slightly longer. So we'll definitely use the right angle connector on the drive side because the drive is right over our power supply. And let's unscrew the other cage as well. Be careful not to drop any drives on the floor here. And we're not gonna worry way too much about tying down the data cables, especially because we don't have all of them. So we will just shove that through. And let's put the two screws into the Seagate drive and let's call that one finished. Okay, now, second data cable for the Western Digital drive, nice and easy. We'll slide it back in. Okay. So all of our hard drives are screwed in. This side is actually finalized first. So let's flip this around and I'll plug in the SATA cables. All right, data cables are in. This thing is actually fully built. Wow. This is pretty crazy that this entire thing is finally built. I have been here for 3 hours now working on just cable management, but this thing looks much nicer for it. So at this point, I am going to take a break. I'm gonna go grab lunch, and then after that, I am going to take some pictures, take some video, just some shots of this thing while it's open and everything is still super nice. All the cable management is perfect. You know, in the future, when I start adding more stuff, more drives, it probably will never look as good as it does right now. But for the time being, I have to say I am very proud of this. I am very proud of what I have accomplished with the cable management here. So I'm gonna take a break, I'll come back, I'll do that, and then I'm going to move this thing into the other room where it's going to live. I'm going to put all the side panels on it, I'm gonna plug it into Ethernet, turn it on, and then we can cut to the desktop, and finally, after months, it's been actually months since I started building this, I can finally start getting ready to use it.